experienced that, and
Yeah.
John will talk a lot more about the
Yeah.
difference. So
Yeah. Yeah. This is, when we talked, yeah, it's a class I did about 12 to 15 years ago for my fire captains, and it was a good one. So at least
we are live, and
are we live
John's
now?
getting the slides, and you're good to go.
All right. So this topic I'm going to discuss right now is a class I gave to my company officers in the fire department about 12 to 15 years ago. And the reason why I did so was because they were struggling with trying to connect with a lot of the new young firefighters. And the problem that they were blaming it on is because, it's just millennials and you can't reach out to them, whatever. But what they were using were like kind of drill sergeant, kind of intimidating, methods, whatever. And they couldn't figure out why that wasn't working. And so I thought it would be, a good opportunity to teach a class that discusses that, because this was, what I learned was from a few different talks from different pastors, different academics. And I'm going to talk about, some of the philosophical and some of the social science underpinnings between power, the exertion of power, to try to, convince people to do what you want, versus using authority, appealing to authority. And there's a difference. So that's what I'll talk about here. Next slide, please. All right. So Mark Twain, has this quote. He goes, "It is curious that physical courage should be so common in the world and moral courage so rare." Is he right? And if so, why? Do we see much more physical courage than moral courage? We're way quicker to fight physically than we are to stand up for somebody because it's the right thing to do. It's something in our DNA where we cut and run when it comes to being morally courage. But physical courage, we'll do that all day long in bars, at parties, you name it. Same thing can't be said for moral courage. Next slide, please. And so this brings me to this German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, I am Christian, I've been raised in the Christian tradition, and I'm all in on it. I mean, the virgin birth, I'm all in. Jonah and the whale, I'm all in. The resurrection, I'm all in. I'm Christian, through and through. However, I also know that listening to our critics can do so much for your own faith. And Nietzsche is one of those critics. German philosopher, likely the most influential thinker, of the 20th century and beyond, easily. Between him and Freud and Karl Marx, I put Nietzsche as the one that's got way more sway, that's held, that's held the test of time. He was an atheist writer right at the time when Darwinism was on the ascent. And what that means is this: as there was kind of this receding of this explanation of God being the explanation of how we got here, how we developed, Darwinism became the prevailing thinking. And so what Nietzsche was saying is, look, if there's no God, we got to rethink everything about this world, rethink morality, rethink progress, all those things. And he was the one that pointed that out. And he also kind of clowned the people who were adherents to the idea that you can be a naturalist, you could be an atheistic person, and still want to hold on to this idea of morality and the like. And so Nietzsche pointed out that they were off base with that. Could you scroll up a little, or maybe shrink a little bit? I don't see the bottom portion of that. You can't condense a little bit? All right, we're fine. All right, next slide. So one of the books he wrote was called The Will to Power. And in that book, he talks about the fact that man's basic drive is power, that ability to either control or dominate others, or control or dominate your own circumstances. He's different from Freud in that Freud thought that we were in pursuit of pleasure, that the primacy of sex. Nietzsche says, no. Power is much more fundamental, much more basic. Because if you've got power, you get all the sex you want, if you really got the power achieved. So he's the one that kind of points that out. And he says that humans are driven towards control over others, themselves, and circumstances. That is our fundamental basic drive, according to Nietzsche. In that, like I said before, he rejected God, and he believed Darwinism vanquished God. In his next book called The Antichrist, in this book, what he's saying is this: that the idea that Christ is for love should be vanquished. He had no use for it whatsoever. He said power is antithetical to love. And he basically said, if Christ is for love, I'm for power. He carved out a space that was absolutely opposite, to the Christian idea that Jesus was invoking by saying that love has primacy. He said, no, power has primacy. Next slide, please. And in his other book called The Genealogy of Morals, what he said there was a trick played on mankind as far as Nietzsche was concerned. And that trick went along these lines. The people who did not have power, Jews and Christians, what they did to gain power was to throw out this sleight of hand move saying, extolling humility, extolling kindness, and venerating, gentleness and meekness. Nietzsche said Jews and Christians were the ones that completely upended the progress of human beings, because what he said was that nature is red and tooth and claw. Mankind only flourishes and grows through warfare, conflict, domination, and the like. And he had a lot, of historical evidence to back that up. We've seen that, and so he says that's the real sauce that'll move mankind forward, the dominant of the strong over the weak. And so he laid the blame at Christianity and Judaism. He called us the herd of inferior peoples, and he said that revaluation of values, that was the trick, that was the sleight of hand played on the powerful people. Just to put a fine point to it, when you remember the story of Cain and Abel in the Bible, what he said was Cain is the superior figure because Cain killed Abel, because Cain was exerting his power, his dominance. Next slide, please. And so this leads to the topic of early Christianity. And so the early Christians had no power. They were persecuted, they were maligned, they were chased around, and they were the weak ones. They were getting slaughtered, left and right. But they were winning souls left and right. I mean, just growing. Why was that? They had no power. They were preaching this gospel of love and charitableness and meekness and kindness, and it flourished. It flourished. So the early Christians, were exactly what Nietzsche was described, that promulgation of love and meekness. But then, next slide, please. The church kind of fell apart. Not fell apart. We got a born again emperor, in Emperor Constantine, and so when Constantine became a Christian, now Christians had what? Power. And the church has never recovered since. Since the days of Constantine, the church has been exerting power in political spheres, in cultural spheres, all over the place. And so what Nietzsche, was pointing out that Nietzsche understood Christ better than the church, and he predicted that future societies would abuse power. And so what we see in contemporary politics, we see that power to dominate others. We see so when I'm pointing out here in the top right picture, that is Westboro Baptist Church, where you have that person protesting saying God hates the F word, the rhymes with brags, and in the bottom right corner we have the Black Power movement. The Black Power movement was one where it's power being exerted to resist domination. And then there was, the next one, you have the power over women, exerting power to confine women to their place. And then more contemporary, to us, the threat is power to exclude immigrants, because the more browning of America, there's this feeling that we're losing, that they're losing power. And so there's resistance to that. You can fix that size, E?
Trying to.
Okay. And then lastly, you see at the bottom, the point of the power to cancel. And we're seeing more of that emerge, where people can galvanize behind a slight, real or imaginary, and be able to cancel somebody. That's another power trip. That's another power play. All of these things are the kind of things that fits squarely into what Nietzsche describes as our fundamental drive towards power. Next slide, please. And so that's what happens. Governments exert power over their own people. We have Idi Amin Dada of Uganda, rather. In Brazil, North Korea. That's a picture of the Taliban, in the bottom right corner. You see these exercises in power to dominate their people. And in the bottom left, talking about in workplaces, that is a depiction of the first clash between labor and management, where bosses try to exert power over their workers and unions try to wrest power back in the workplace. Again, more power games. Next slide, please. So the sign at Auschwitz, that really kind of puts a fine point to what Nietzsche's doctrine and how it seeped into fascism, particularly with Hitler. Hitler was so enamored with it. Hitler and Mussolini were so enamored with Nietzsche. They personally distributed books of Nietzsche, to their followers, to their lieutenants, all that stuff. And what Hitler said in one of his interviews, he goes, "I freed Germany from the stupid and degrading fallacies of conscience, morality. We will train young people before whom the world will tremble. I want young people capable of violence, imperious, relentless, and cruel." This is kind of a predecessor, because when you look, and so the picture I'm showing below that are the barbed wired barriers put in the Rio Grande, to stop immigrants, which are drowning children, drowning people, slicing them up one side down the other. So if we had to look on a number line with one end being kindness and the other one being cruelty, where would you place that on that line? Closer to kindness or closer to cruelty? Exactly. If it's closer to cruelty, this fits, into the idea of what Nietzsche was talking about with our yearning for power to dominate, to exclude, all that stuff. Next slide, please. We see power games played in the families. In some families, you got parents who force obedience on their children. And other times, you have parents who are way too permissive and cede power to their children. We have husbands that try to seek, to exert power over their wives, and wives try to exert equal or greater power back to their husbands. Next slide, please. Yeah. Yeah. And so what we see, like even in the women's liberation movement, they were correct in pointing out that we are sick of 150 million pushy, obnoxious, domineering men. But what they decided was the way you counter that is to create 150 million women who are pushy, obnoxious, and domineering. And so now we have a standoff. We have this détente, where now we're facing each other down because of that. And even in the cost of relationships, men use scriptures to dominate wives. Ephesians 5:22 says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord." And so you got exactly. And you'll have men that'll go to that all day long as to why they can say, "I call the shots in this family. You just go on back to the kitchen and worry about stuff." And it doesn't work that way. Next slide, please. So the actual, Christian model of marriage. And here's what I bring this up, and it's not to be sermoning or preaching, because I'm going to tie this in later on to how this affects you and your business, you and your organization, and you wherever else that you're going to operate. But it goes like this. So yes, Ephesians 5:22 says, "Wives, submit to your husband as to the Lord." And then it says at 5:25, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself to her." The question then is, how did Christ love the church? And so it's got to cut off. Basically what it's saying is in Philippians 2:6 is that Christ was equal with God, but he made himself humbled, when he came to earth, up to the point of being a servant, And the original Greek says even to the point of being a slave. So God allowed himself to be, he loved us so much where his son was basically consigned to being a servant/slave for us. So then what I would ask my women's liberation friends or my I'd ask any one of you, what wife would have trouble submitting to a husband who defined himself as her servant? Exactly. And so put a pin in that, because I'm going to circle back to that very point. But think about that question again. What wife would have trouble submitting to a husband who defined himself as her servant? Next slide, please. So this takes me to the sociologist named Willard Waller. Willard Waller was a sociologist in the early 1900s, and he studied the sociology of the family. Waller had relationship problems, though, and he saw it in his parents, and he saw it himself. It just wouldn't last, and he's trying to figure out why. Next slide, please. And so what he did is he originated this term called the principle of least interest, which is a powerful concept. And it basically goes like this: whoever has the least interest in cultivating a relationship has the most power in that relationship. So I've got a partner, and I love her, love her, love her, and I'll do anything to hold on to her. She couldn't care if I come or go. Who's calling the shots of where we're going to eat, when we're going to eat, what movies we're going to watch? She's calling the shot. And it's by virtue of the fact that she cares the least about the relationship. So she assumes the power in that relationship. And so we've seen that played out in real life. The Will and Jada saga, people try to explain, why did Will Smith, not otherwise given to violence, why did he get up and accost, Chris Rock? Well, if you know the backstory, you know that there's all kinds of incidences and evidence that showed that he loved Jada way more than Jada loved him. She couldn't care less how much she embarrassed him, humiliated him. He loved her enough where she had the power. She had the, and the more she had the power, the more she seemed to resent him for it, which only made him work that much harder, which I think, is one of the reasons why he had such an outburst that was so uncharacteristic to him, that shocked everyone. The principle of least interest was at play there. But before we get to judging him, though, everyone gets a turn in that boat. You've all been in a relationship where at one point or another, you cared more than your partner, or maybe your partner cared more about you. It goes in cycles. But there are some relationships where it doesn't cycle. It's always an imbalance. You've been in those two probably. And if you haven't, if you've never been in that situation where you've been in the imbalance, it's only because A, you always care way too much, or you always care way too little. Those are the only options, but the fact of the matter is, withholding love, if withholding love, withholding care, is your strategy, that's a problem, because that's a power game that Nietzsche's talking about. And that is not commensurate with relationships. Back up a little bit. And so we see that even in geopolitics, Al-Qaeda does not care about the peace. Terrorists don't care about disrupting the peace. We do. And that's why we are always at a disadvantage until we resort to what? Power, to try to counter that. Same with, some of the militant civil rights movement. Yeah, you're going to a point? Go ahead.
No, I was following, I said, just like the military, how you said, like, the Al-Qaeda, they don't fight with rules, and we can get messed up because we have so many morals, you know what I mean?
Exactly. No, exactly.
You can't do that.
Exactly. Right.
Everything.
Right. They care less about peace. They care less about, conventions of war. Also, the minute you try to inject an ethic, an ethos to it, or try to hold a moral high ground, whatever, you cede power. You give up power, and terrorists know that. But we even see that in some militant civil rights movements and revolutionaries. Riots are not really fundamental efforts that move or advance dialogue further. What they are a demonstration of is we care less about the peace, because for whatever reason, I'm not judging the reasons that got them there, but rioting is a way to say, okay, the way I gain power back is showing I don't care about peace. It's a power play. Next slide, please. The problem with power, though, is it never conquers the heart. It just does not. Next slide, please. The alternative to power is authority. And so what authority is, and you can go to the next slide, please. The German sociologist Max Weber, he points out three kinds of authority, three appeals of authority. One of them is the legal authority. So that would be like the police officers and they have the legal authority to ask us to pull over and show our license, this, that, and the other. There's traditional authority, and those are the people like our pastors and our ministers and like. But for this talk, I really want to make the appeal to charismatic authority. And what that is the ability to persuade people, to do something. My mom, I could push her down the steps anytime I wanted. She could not physically make me do anything I didn't want to do, but I'd do anything she would ask me, because she had tremendous authority, over me. Because you get that authority from loving sacrifice that's built over time, and it's evidence of your love, and it's something that anyone can do. But authority is much, much, much more of a gold standard to appeal to than power by a long shot. Next slide, please. And love is the standard. Love is the standard. It is the question that you ask. When you want to grapple with a political issue or a moral issue, the first thing you should ask is, what is the most loving way to approach this topic? When you're thinking about, your workplace and the like, Love is the standard, not power. Love is the standard. And love can win. Love can conquer power. So the civil rights movement, for example, it was won probably at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And that's the case. That's the incident where Dr. Martin Luther King and they marched, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and Bull Connor had the dogs waiting, and they marched and they stayed peaceful. And that is when the civil rights movement won, because when Bull Connor exerted power against King's authority, that authority won out in the long run. And I'll even add to this. We've had Black mayors, Black governors, Black senators, Black congressmen, Black lawyers, Black activists, everything, including a Black president. I would argue that more was accomplished in the civil rights movements of the 60s than all of those leaders combined. King's authority had more lasting significance than any of the power positions we've had thus far, because that's the only thing that really has not receded. The fundamentals, the sentiment of the civil rights movement really has not receded. They've pushed back on Obama policies like Obamacare. They've pushed back on David Dinkins policies, or you name the politician, there's been a pushback on it. But the civil rights movement has held sway. Go back. The top right corner. That's in World War II. In Bulgaria, there was a movement to round up, the Jews and put them all on trains and send them to concentration camps, until through the smoke and crowd emerges this 6'5" guy, named Metropolitan Kirill. And I don't know if you guys know, in Greek Orthodox religion, they've got those tall miters. So imagine he's 6'3" and he's got a tall miter and he's barreling through. And he brought his followers there, and he said to the Nazis, "If they go, we go," which is a takeoff from Ruth, where Ruth said to I forgot the wife, the mother-in-law's name. Can you help me with that? Anyway, in the Old Testament, there's an incident where Ruth is with the mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law was going to be taken away, and she goes, "Where you go, I go," and that's what Metropolitan Kirill was advocating. He goes, "If they go, we go," and the Nazis backed off. They left those Jews in Bulgaria. They backed off. And in the bottom right corner, we're looking at Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi did not resort to power, when they did the nonviolence resistance, and it led to the creation of the largest democracy on the planet in India, without firing a shot. He held no office, when he effectively, through nonviolence, changed the course of Indian history, just like that. Next slide, please. So here's the thing about love, though. It requires way more courage than power. Power is easy. When you got it, it's the easy thing to go to. But love requires commitment to truth and honesty. Manipulation is bad. Manipulation is bad, like it's no different than coercion. It requires love to be both a means and an ends. And what that means is this: I should not show you love because I want to get something from you. I should show you love because love is an end in and of itself. Simple as that. Conversely, I'll look in relationship context. People shouldn't use sex to get love, nor should they use love to get sex. Love is both its own means and its own ends. And that plays out too in the way we interact, in the way we dialogue, in the way we work together. And if I'm a supervisor and you work for me, that should also, it shouldn't be a manipulation there either. But it also requires vulnerability. It reverses, what Waller described, the principle of least interest. Next slide, please. As a leader, you lead with authority, and you lead with love. As a leader, you choose authority over power. The first law, the first commandment I give my captains and my chiefs, as I said, the first commandment is you must give a damn. Because the more you give a damn about your people, the more likely you are to teach them for their sake. Not to make your job easier, you're teaching for their sake. The more likely you are to delegate responsibility, not to make your job easier, for their sake. You hold high standards for your people, not to make your life easier, your job easier. You're doing it for their sake. Even as a teacher, you hold them to high standards because you give a damn. You do it for their sake. And you hold your people accountable for their sake. And the same for when you're a subordinate, a partner, a parent. You don't you don't do the job well for your boss because you're trying to get a raise. You do it for their sake. You do it as an expression of love. Next slide, please. And as a romantic partner, you should be in a competition with your partner. You should be a competition with your spouse. And it should be, I'm trying to see you, whether you have a battle here. Yeah, I'm going to hold the door for you, and I'm going to think about your interest, and I'm going to try to do that more than you do. Who esteems the other better? That's what a real lasting relationship should be built on, not power or coercion to dominate. And as an entrepreneur, be trustworthy, for your client's sake. Be a person of high character. Be a person of high competency. What that means is this: high character, high competency goes this way. If you have a doctor, for example, that you got to take your mom to, and they've got high character but low competency, they're not real good at their job, but you trust them, they're good people, are you going to take your mom to that doctor? Because all that person could be is a friend. They cannot treat your mom. Or if they're high competency but lower character, which means they know their job well, but you just don't trust their word, are you going to take your mom to them? No. You want high character and high competency, and that's what you want to be, because you want to have that trustworthiness, which is commensurate with love, not manipulation or power coercion. And so do business with each other, where you esteem them. It should be win-win. That's what the varsity level folks do. Junior varsity is trying to cheat somebody or beat somebody out of it. Next slide. Pardon me? Ruth and what? Ruth and Naomi? Oh, Ruth and Naomi. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. All right. So questions. I know this was a drink from a fire hydrant. And what I'm asking for is hard ones, because I've been thinking about this a lot. And so I feel like, we can go deep into this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts and your questions along those lines. Yes, Elias.
So the food is arrived.
Okay.
And what I would love to recommend, if folks are open to it, is we pause on the slide.
Okay.
Do some hot seat moments, and then everybody can go grab food, and then you can be hot seating with whoever while folks are grabbing food.
Okay.
Is that cool? Hot seat moment is come sit next to John. We take the slides off. We're live, by the way. We're still live. So say, yeah, exactly. But I want to invite folks to who wants to be nominated to go in the hot seat first. We got brother over here. All right, everybody else, you can go grab food right now. We got to be quick with grabbing food because all the kids are going to grab food right after us. So they're kind of waiting until we grab our stuff.
And who knows how clean their fingers are.
Exactly.
Welcome to UNLV Rebels Give, where rebels like you make it happen. This year, we're rallying our rebel community to support Blackfire innovation and provide students with scholarship opportunities through case competitions. Thanks to the generosity of our donors and sponsors, we awarded scholarships totaling $20,000 to 6 deserving students who participated in our Breaking Bankruptcy Case competition. This competition challenged student teams from various disciplines to showcase their skills in reviving businesses from Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Participating in this case competition wasn't just about winning a scholarship. It was about learning to collaborate, think creatively, and make a real impact. Thanks to generous donors like you, I was able to pursue my education with confidence. Let's keep supporting future rebels as they strive to make a difference.
It was a fantastic opportunity for students to collaborate and demonstrate workforce development skills. These funds directly impacted students and their ability to continue to pursue their collegiate goals. But we're not done yet. This fall, we're hosting another thrilling challenge, and your donation will make a huge difference in supporting teamwork, creativity, and education beyond the classroom. Join us in fueling passion of Rebels students and helping them reach new heights. Together, let's show the world that Rebels truly do make it happen.